Okay, so my name's Erin Bell. For those of you I haven't met, I'm the director of the Global Experience Office, and our office helps administer the application process for the off-campus IQP, as well as prepare students and faculty to go away. So we're thrilled to be kind of reflexing those muscles that we haven't been able to use as much after the last academic year. As you know, we have slowly restarted travel. We have about half of our groups on site for B term. Knock on wood, we're going well. And we're going to have even more of our groups away for C term and then tracking well for D term as well. So the things that I'm going to go over are just some of the program policies, some reminders of procedures and protocols that you should expect to adhere to while you're on site. There is a lot more detail in terms of what to pack and what's the climate like and what should you expect to do on the weekends. That type of stuff is going to come not just from your advisors, but also from Gary. And I know most of you have followed the Facebook page, and he's a wealth of information, obviously, as now a local to the area. So Gary, Courtney, please feel free to jump in if there's something that you think would be relevant as I go through this. And otherwise, like I said, this is just to share some of the things to come when it comes to what to expect from our office as well. So here's your beautiful city. Right behind it is these mountains, which I'm sure you've heard are great for hiking. I had the pleasure of going to Cuenca with Gary right when we were starting to explore this as a project center. And I have to tell you, I think it's one of the most ideal locations for projects. So you guys are in for a treat. Like I mentioned, these are some of the topics we'll go over today. You're going to receive a handbook a little bit closer to departure that will reiterate some of these details that I'm going over. So just keep an eye out for that. That handbook will have more details along these lines, specific housing details, specific arrival instructions, some of the information that you will hear from your advisors and Gary as well. So one audience participation question. These are some of the headlines that you may have seen over the years when it comes to international travel. I think, the past year and a half has shown us that international travel comes with risks, not only risks for accidents or, weather type emergencies or other, what we would call quote unquote acts of God that could happen while people are traveling, but also concerns for health emergencies and others. So these are all things that our office is watching over on a daily basis, taking into account with planning and certainly taking into account with restarting travel. But my question to you, and you can either unmute and just shout it out or put your thoughts in the chat. What do you think are the greatest risks to international travelers when traveling abroad, and specifically to student travelers traveling abroad? So what do you think the greatest risks are? And I'll give you a hint, there's 5. Anybody got an idea? Mara says pickpockets. So opportune crimes. That's a good guess. Anybody else? What do you think is number 1? Advisors, I'll let you participate too.
I know I've seen this presentation a lot, but it's been a while. Are we at the part where we talk about swimming yet?
Not swimming, but that's, so Lally says disease injury, definitely something to consider. Number one remains COVID and other pandemic incidents aside, road traffic. So the biggest risk to US students when traveling abroad is the possibility of being in a car accident, whether you are driving, which I would certainly not recommend, or whether you are in a bus or a cab or another type of moving vehicle. So I bring this up not to scare you about travel, but to make sure that you are remaining vigilant when you're thinking about your weekend plans, and we'll go over weekend a little bit more. But just to remind you, of what is a risk out there. Mara, good job with number 2, opportunistic crime. So that would be things like pickpocketing, or you leave your bag on the bus and you turn around and start talking to a friend, and oh, by the time you're ready to get off, somebody has taken that bag. So nothing that's harming your personal safety, but it is certainly a pain in the butt, quite frankly, to have to, get your new credit cards or passport or whatever you might have lost in that crime. And then Lally, number 3 is pre-existing health conditions. So good job with that one. This is why we ask for your health information prior to departure, which good job, Cuenca. Most of you have turned that in. And we ask you to assess what would be the risks that you know about for yourself for being away from home for 7 weeks and possibly needing medical care. So that's why that health form is a kind of help us help you form, where we want you to think about your own pre-existing medical conditions, and how they could potentially come into play while you're abroad. I'm going to skip over number 4 for 1 second and just go down to drowning. So Courtney, good job. Water, concerns of, whether there's beaches and you've got a undertow or riptide involved, or really just any instance of, swimming in areas where you might not know the risks. You really need to be careful there. Sexual assault is part of this, and there is a portion of my presentation where we'll talk a little bit more about that, just as a reminder for what you guys have done on the Canvas course. And then I want to come back to number 4, which I would say when it involves making smart choices about road traffic, or types of vehicles that you're driving, when it makes making smart choices about keeping yourself safe, whether it's, in decisions about where to go or how to make sure you're keeping track of your own personal items. Drinking can kind of be an overarching concern for many of these risks. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that today as well. I always like to remind students that, you are actually a group of students who had a quote unquote normal first year at college. And if you think back to that, excitement of being here on campus, being in a new environment, meeting new people, we often compare that, first semester, first year at college to the feeling of going abroad. It's new, it's exciting, it's sometimes a little scary. And there's potentially people who turn to alcohol in all of those situations. So whether it's excitement, whether it's fun, whether it's fear or anxiety, we really want you to consider that those same concerns of your first semester, first year, are the same type of things you want to think about when you're traveling abroad, when it comes to taking care of one another, being aware of how much you're drinking and where your drinks are, you know, and just kind of remembering why you're there, which is to get your project work done and wake up bright and early on Monday morning to get ready. So that's just a little screenshot. So one thing I want to bring up before we get into details there is just the COVID numbers and what we've been watching over when it comes to COVID risks in relation to restarting travel and in relation to the risks to our students and faculty while away. These numbers come from the New York Times, who has done a really great job of kind of aggregating the data when it comes to COVID and having some of the same factors that we can look at to compare not just Massachusetts, not just Worcester, but the United States as a whole, and then the countries that our students and faculty are going to. So as you can see here, the United States today has 26 cases per 100,000. So that's just kind of a snapshot of where we are, you know, in terms of cases per 100,000, which has been a good marker along the way for the pandemic. A good place to be, you know, what's considered low and you know, on the safer end is anywhere under 5 cases per 100,000. So what you can see is Ecuador is actually there, while the United States is a little more elevated than we would like to be. One thing that has come into play as the pandemic has progressed is factoring in vaccination rate. So previously we would look at these cases per 100,000 and say, okay, things are on the rise. Maybe this is not the time to be traveling to this place, which, you know, Ecuador is certainly in the clear there. What becomes more nuanced is we're now taking into account the vaccination rate in each of the places where we're going. And what we want to make sure is that anywhere we're going is on par or doing better with vaccination rate than we are here in the US. So Ecuador is on a whole is 60% fully vaccinated. Actually in Cuenca and the state of Azuay, which is where Cuenca is located, that's even higher. Gary has said potentially even as high as 80%. So that's a really good indicator of transmission and makes us feel confident that we are sending your group to a place where the COVID rate is looking similar or better to the US. And also, you know, one guarantee that we have is that the whole cohort is fully vaccinated. So just as a reminder, that is a requirement, not just for the GPP programs, but for any WPI sponsored international travel, that every person on the program needs to be fully vaccinated. And we are gonna confirm that with the health center. But first we're looking at your intentions survey. So
can I just jump in?
Go ahead, Gary.
Cuenca
Yes.
right now is 97% vaccinated.
97%. That's better than WPI's campus.
And they are giving boosters.
Awesome. Oh, just an aside on boosters. It's very likely, some of you may have seen that some states are starting, some US states are starting to open up to anyone receiving a booster. And it's very likely that you're going to start to hear from WPI about thinking about when to get your booster based on when you got your first shot. So keep an eye out for that. And especially considering that you're going to be traveling soon, we will have more information, but I would encourage you to just start keeping an eye out for booster information. We even have some indication that some countries are going to require boosters, either vaccination within 6 months or a booster within 6 months of entry to the country. I'm not aware of that for Ecuador yet, but I just want to keep it on everybody's minds that the name of the game with the pandemic and travel has been anticipate change, anticipate updates, and anticipate potential updates very close to departure. So what I'm telling you today is our information that we have today at 12:17 p.m. on November 16th. But if there are any changes, we'll be communicating those via email, or, if there are large changes, potentially with another presentation or meeting. So I just want to make sure that everybody is paying attention to those messages when they go out. Any other details, Gary, on COVID in Cuenca?
No, I've been telling the students there's been a slight uptick in cases per week because of the 5-day holiday. So, but I would expect that in Cuenca, we're going to have maybe, we see 10 mild cases per day. I think there's been 1 death in the past couple of weeks, so.
Great. I mean, not great, but very low. So some information about testing. Right now, Ecuador is still requiring a negative PCR test 72 hours before entry. This is pretty standard for most countries at this point. Our office is going to confirm, since that would be January 4th for your group or sooner, the 3rd or 4th. We're going to confirm that on-campus testing will be available for those of you that are local enough to come back to campus. If available, that means, it would be through the same system that you've been testing before. There'd be no cost, which is very attractive. And you would be able to just print your results right from the same system where we get our results currently. If you're not going to be close to campus or won't be able to come back down, there are plenty of ways to get a travel COVID test. They can be costly. They can be somewhere between $80 to $100 usually, and not often covered by insurance. So just keep in mind, you may want to start looking into where you would get a travel test and how much. I mean, it's possible that they'll come down in cost, which would be great. I don't know that insurance is going to start covering them, but just something to keep in mind. CVS, Walgreens, Carewell, which is a chain of urgent cares. These are all places that I've seen offer pretty easy ways to schedule and test. But you will want to just think about that. I know that the airport may have options, but that's probably going to be more costly. And like I said, if we can get you in for testing at the health center and you're local enough, even if you're an hour away, it may be worth it to drive down for a test at WPI. While you're on site, we will not be running a regular testing regimen, not a twice a week or once a week regimen for testing. One thing that we have been clear with the B-term groups on, and even back to the A-term groups, is you're leaving our permeable yet still quite sheltered bubble of the WPI campus when you're going off campus. And I think many of you have maybe started to do this, whether at home or in other environments where you are starting to get out there a little bit more. What this means is having a fully vaccinated cohort is very important. And it's very important that you as an individual and as a group are just remaining vigilant with the ways that we know how to mitigate risk when it comes to COVID, which is masking indoors, social distancing when possible. So, really tightly packed indoor spaces or, other situations where you feel like you're kind of on top of one another. You just want to be careful in those type of situations. And most importantly, monitoring your own symptoms. We know, especially this term, there's lots of colds going around. There's lots of, other things other than COVID that look like COVID, even the flu. And so it can be a little bit hard to say, is this or is this not? One really helpful indicator is fever. So we are going to send your advisors with thermometers. So if you're not feeling well, you can certainly check your temperature and, see where you're doing, how you're doing there. It would even be advisable to bring your own thermometer just as an easy checkpoint, especially for a peace of mind for yourself. Another indicator is just out of the ordinary symptoms. So, travel, especially like, you know yourself, but for me, when I sit on a plane for a number of hours, I get congested. I just, the recycled air, and like, I just don't always feel well after a day of travel. But if that subsides the next day, I would probably, chalk that up to a day of travel. If you have persistence of some symptoms that are not going away, or certainly if you've been in contact with someone that has tested positive for COVID, then you need to, be vigilant and follow protocols for testing after that. So we have a whole protocol testing plan, which I'm not going to go into detail here, but do know that we have already worked with Gary on identifying your housing space, which is the same housing that we've worked with in years past. We've thought through, if we needed extra space, what would we need to do to get that space for isolation. We have extra support on the ground through the University of Cuenca. So if we needed to put into motion an isolation protocol, we can do that. And without naming locations or more information, we had to do that already in B term. Knock on wood, I don't think that that's going to be a frequent thing, but I certainly didn't expect that there would be no cases. So we have had to enact our protocol at least once. And we know that, isolating a positive person, making sure that that close contacts are monitoring themselves for symptoms and testing 5 to 7 days after exposure. These are all ways to make sure that we're mitigating risk of spread amongst a group of you that are very close contact with each other. So thankfully, this B-term case turned out to be one case, and that was it. And we didn't have any spread throughout the whole cohort. So it is something that that we know we can mitigate as long as everybody's being vigilant. So that's a little bit about COVID, a little bit more about travel and entry requirements. So you may have started to look at flights and shop around. Like I said in my email, which came out a couple of weeks ago, you are going to have to think about arrival, potentially leaving a whole day early, just because getting down to Cuenca can sometimes require a whole overnight to get there. If you're arriving any earlier than the start date, just keep in mind that that arrangement for housing, that arrangement for entry requirements is going to be on you. So we highly discourage that, especially in a year when we are just restarting travel. We really want you to think about arriving on the arrival date, staying through the departure date, and sticking to those travel dates.
Can I just jump in for a sec, Erin?
Go ahead, yeah.
That the dates that sent out in that email were a day off.
Oh, no, really?
So Gary, what are the proper dates? You know them off the top of your head, don't you?
Okay, so students will arrive here on January 6th. we've been telling them that they're probably gonna have to leave on January 5th.
Mhm.
The housing will be available January 6th, but we might be able to, if they're coming early, I'll see if Gustavo can let them in or let them in cheaply or whatever. And they will leave on March 5th, by March 5th. So housing is available from the 6th to March 5th. The orientation starts on the 7th.
Okay, great. So you have some time to settle in. Esther said she plans to arrive on the 5th. And then Bella, you asked about the 72, the testing prior to departure from Ecuador. And yes, as of today, you would need to have a negative test to re-enter the US. If that remains, we will facilitate getting that test. If anything changes, which I say if, because some countries are starting to say, if you're fully vaccinated, you don't need a negative test. We'll watch what the US does there. But if you do need a negative test for arrival, we will have details coordinated with Gary, I'm sure, on the best place to get that test.
Right now, there are any hospital, of course, Santa, or not Santa Ynez, but I put it in the comment, but Monte Sinai, Santa Ynez, and there's the Austro lab that will come to the apartments. And tests are regulated to be no more than $45.
That's excellent. Yeah, if the on-site at the apartments option is less than $45.
I think they're all $45. That's, you can't go higher than $45. So a couple of them are down at $42.50 or something. But.
Nice, the cheaper route. Well, if it is the case that everyone still needs it for reentry, we'll arrange that, and that is an out-of-pocket expense for students, but just keeping in mind that it's not the $80 to $100 on the other side. So like I mentioned, for your free time and weekend travel, just to go back, sorry, 1 second. Ecuador is a country that you're not likely going to have the time to leave, quite frankly, during your project term. We want to make sure it's clear that this year especially, there is no travel outside of Ecuador during the project term. And there are even some regions of Ecuador that we consistently recommend students do not travel to. And I'm going to go over that on the next slide with a link to the US Department of State. So during your free time, your weekends are your weekends. The one thing that your advisors will ask is that you report your weekend travel, usually through a Google Doc that they will share a link to. This is not to track your every movement. Part of the benefit of going off campus is that you have a little of this extra free time to explore the place that you're in. Really, we just want to know, in case of an emergency, how we would get in touch with you and where you were traveling, so that we could either contact you at an alternate location. Let's say that cell service wasn't that great. Maybe you have a hotel that you're staying at where we can try and get in touch with you. Or we know that, let's say your parents called and they said they hadn't heard from you. We could let them know that you were traveling to an area that was a little farther outside of Cuenca and that you'd be in touch. Another reason that weekend travel reporting is important is for unforeseen yet possible circumstances, like an incident happening outside of Cuenca that we need to confirm we don't have any students there. So let's say there is civil unrest in Quito, or there's a terrorist attack in Quito. We want to know where our students are, and we would go back to this weekend travel information to confirm who's been where, and who do we need to contact or make sure that we have confirmed they are okay. So it's not often a form that we need to go back to in great detail, but when we do, it's an important piece of information to have. As I mentioned, be careful about the types of transportation that you're taking. Gary's a great resource for companies to use for activities and things you want to do. The University of Cuenca staff can also make some recommendations. Really, when you're thinking about travel vendors, a great place to go is, look at their reviews on TripAdvisor. If they don't have anything on TripAdvisor, if they seem like they're kind of new, that might be a little bit of a concern. And trust your gut. If you book with something and it just doesn't feel right, better to lose that deposit, or better to have to ask for a refund than get into a situation where you just don't feel comfortable. So first and foremost, use reputable companies that have come as a referral. And then certainly be careful in areas where you're swimming. This kind of brings up a point of where to travel within Ecuador. During the time that you're there, we'd like you to stay within Azue, within the state of Cuenca. So there's a lot to do in that area. Most likely a place that you may encounter some swimming and will be most likely going to is Baños. That would be like a weekend trip. That would be an overnight, but certainly a fun place to go to. There are some other areas around the country. If you want to, I'll send around these slides, but if you want to go to the US State Department and look for Ecuador, you can see the areas of the country that are recommended that US travelers do not travel to. This is the north of the country, close to Colombia, which has been known for some drug trafficking and other associated crimes. And then also Guayaquil. So Guayaquil is a higher area for crime. It's also a higher area for COVID overall, for the country as a whole, and may seem like an area for beaches, but not really the greatest beaches. So there's no reason to go to Guayaquil. We've actually taken that out as an option even for flying, because you'd have to drive from Guayaquil over to Cuenca. So no real reason to go that route, and nothing really that you're missing out on there.
Let
Gary,
me
I
just
saw
jump
some-
in with two things
Yeah,
here.
go ahead. Mhm.
All right, one is Baños is not in Osway, but it's still a good place to
Oh,
go.
okay. Thanks for clarifying.
And we're restricting we don't want anybody going to the coast, period. Right now, there are significant activities with Mexican drug cartels trying to get in anywhere around the coast. So Manta, Guayaquil, and it's just, there's enough to do here and going up to Baños and all.
Exactly. Yeah. So interior of the country, and certainly with reputable vendors. Okay, so I'll stop there for 1 second. Are there any questions about weekend travel or about entry or exit? Feel free to put anything in the
I do know
chat.
that some of the students wanted to know if they would be allowed to go to the Galapagos before or after the start of the term. My understanding was yes, but I thought maybe they should hear it from you.
Yep. Thanks for asking. And I think that falls into what I was saying on the previous slide, that you need to think about what would change about the entry requirements when it comes to COVID testing. You would just want to make sure that that you have that all lined up. If you're going to the Galapagos, excuse me, everybody. If you're going to the Galapagos, you may be going on a tour, and think about what requirements they're asking of you for that tour company. You know, we want to make sure that there's no barriers to you getting to Cuenca on time and starting your project. So my recommendation, if I was to choose, it would be to stay a little bit after, make sure that your project's done, and then enjoy some time before coming back. But especially with C-term, you do have a larger amount of time in between terms. So as long as you are just paying attention to the day that you need to be in Cuenca and taking care of arrangements, that is up to you. But I think the preference would be after, if possible.
Right now, going to the Galapagos is, I think if you just have your vaccination card, but you may need the test. And depending on where you go from, you may end up going through Guayaquil. And if you do, just stay at the Holiday Inn right next to the airport. So if you have to stay overnight, if you get in at night and then leave for the Galapagos on the plane the next day, you stay at the airport Holiday Inn and then take off.
Yeah. One thing to think about, actually tying into this next slide about international ISOS, your coverage for WPI support, and then by extension support through our ISOS medical insurance and international travel risk support starts on the day of the program. So any travel that you're doing ahead of time, I mean, we're always here. We're not going to leave one of our people hanging. But, you know, when it comes to costs or something, if there was a medical emergency that came up while you were traveling, you would just need to consider your coverage outside of the ISOS travel insurance. The other thing that I will kind of put a plug in for travel afterwards is we have had students who have traveled before to all different locations, not just Cuenca, and ended up getting sick because of, you know, and this goes back pre-pandemic even, you know, because they're traveling and out and about in those days before arriving on site, and then they end up having to deal with getting better from that travel in the first days of the project term. So if you are going to travel ahead of time, you know, just try to be vigilant when it comes to staying healthy, and, you know, don't go all out to the point that you're arriving on site feeling like you need, you know, a vacation from your vacation, basically. So to go into ISOS, ISOS is a company that manages our international travel insurance that every WPI traveler is covered under. And they also have travel security assistance. So they're kind of a wraparound extension of our office, quite frankly, while you're away. You're going to get a physical card that has our membership number on it and a dedicated phone number. You can, you know, find this information on our website too, but you'll have a card, and I would recommend that you save that phone number into your phone right away, and also download the ISOS app. So you can contact ISOS at any time, even prior to departure. So if you have questions about going to the Galapagos, for example, not necessarily like travel agent type questions, but maybe medical or travel security questions, you can contact ISOS. If you have a pre-existing condition that you're a little worried about travel, you can contact ISOS. They'll give you some more information. Or if you just have a nervous parent who wants some more information about COVID risks and travel, you can contact the ISOS before you go. While you're abroad, you can always call this dedicated number. You can also access a chat function in the app to talk to an ISOS medical advisor. Basically, this is like one step before telehealth. So let's say you're not feeling well and you want to decide what to do. You're like, I don't know if this is COVID. I don't know if this is strep throat. You can call ISOS first and they'll listen to your symptoms, take some more information and make a best recommendation on what they think you should do next. Let's say it's more serious, that you're having some pretty significant pain in your abdomen. They can make a best recommendation and suggest where to go, which would be likely the same hospitals that are in our handbook. And let's say you had to be admitted and needed emergency appendectomy. At that point, ISOS can kick in to help with the billing at a hospital if you needed more serious care. So if you had to be admitted, if you had to get something like your appendix out, that's where traveling internationally can become a little bit more complicated, because a lot of hospitals want a guarantee of payment before they begin any care. And not a lot of people can just throw down a credit card for that amount, although Gary can tell you that medical care is extremely cheap in Ecuador. At the same time, you have international SOS to back you up if you ever needed care that was, requiring that guarantee of payment. The other thing that ISOS can do that is important for our office to just know is possible is they can help with emergency evacuations if we ever needed to get people out quickly, or if a single person needed to get back to the US for more medical care, they can help with transport. So they're just a really, great resource to have kind of behind the scenes. Here's a snapshot of what the app looks like. And these same details will be in your handbook about how to download the app. If you just search in the App Store, you will find the ISOS app, and then you can use our membership number to log in. So this is in the handbook, but I'll tell you now that you want to start thinking about having enough prescription meds for the whole time you're gone, which would equate to usually 2 months worth of meds. And you'll need to just have your doctor order a travel advance so that you're able to get more medication and have that in time. Everything should be appropriately labeled. If it's a medication that you're worried about bringing to another country, sometimes ADHD medications can be worrisome. Some other mental health or other drugs that are potentially used for mental health resources can be questionable. So if you have any concern, there's nothing that comes to mind like top of mind for Ecuador, but carrying your prescription with you can be helpful. And always keep your meds in your checked luggage, not in your checked luggage, in your carry-on. Keep your meds with you. If you're bringing things like Advil or allergy medications, just make sure they're in the original containers. And if you have questions about medicines or any, medical questions before you go, you can reach out to the GO and we can help there if you have questions. So I want to highlight a few key areas before we wrap up. Like I said, alcohol is one of our biggest concerns, because usually an incident that becomes a concern is sort of an alcohol plus type of incident. So, opportunistic crime plus alcohol, road travel plus alcohol. Keep in mind that you are still a WPI student. While you're away, you are still held to the WPI Code of Conduct. Most of you are of legal drinking age in Ecuador. So we are not policing your drinking habits. What we're concerned about is the behaviors associated with drinking. So if you are consistently late on Monday mornings and it's affecting your team and it's affecting your project work, if you have a safety concern, but it's alcohol related. So somebody's never locking the door to your apartment and another person is able to get in and take something, but there's an alcohol plus type of situation involved, we would address the alcohol behavior. If you had a medical incident, this is the same thing that happens on campus. If you fell and twisted your ankle at 2 a.m. and part of that involved drinking as well, we would first and foremost want to make sure you get the medical care you need. But then we would also want to address that drinking incident and make sure, how are we going to make sure something like this doesn't happen again? So just know that, watching out for yourself and watching out for others on your cohort, drinking responsibly. We want you to enjoy the place you're in, but we don't want you to get into a situation of compromising your own safety. Along with that goes staying with one another. We want you to always be traveling with at least 2 other WPI colleagues. So if you're going out at night, just 2 people together means if there was a concern, you have to leave each other alone. If you're with a group, at least 3 or more, you always have some people to travel with. And part of our policy is never to bring any non-WPI people back to the accommodation. That's compromising the safety of the whole apartment. Even if it's somebody by week 6 you feel pretty comfortable with, just keep in mind that there's still that opportunity for someone to come into the apartment and say, oh, look, they all leave their computers right here next to the window. Wouldn't that be easy to get those computers or whatever it may be? So just don't take that risk by bringing people back to the apartments. And then looking after mental health. So I know that for most of you, the excitement of going to Ecuador is probably top of mind right now. And there may be some worries or some anxiety too. We anticipate this. We are certainly here as a resource to you. The GEO office, the SDCC is still a resource as well. They can't do regular check-ins if you meet with them regularly, but they're always a resource to our students, no matter where you are in the world. So they are great for consultations, great for quick check-ins, and then can make some recommendations about other support that would be helpful. So keep in mind that international travel is exciting. It can also be, it can be a journey. So, you're there for 7 weeks. The first 2 weeks are going to feel like they fly by and there's a lot to do and, it's exciting and you're starting project work. By week 3 or 4, you may kind of feel like, well, I'm still here and I, don't have any plans next weekend. I miss my friends. I miss my boyfriend or girlfriend at home. Communication is spotty at times. So expect that there's going to be really great days and there's going to be some, days that are just not as exciting, or even that, you're just not feeling like yourself as you get used to a new environment and get used to a new place where you're living. So my advice is always to be forgiving of yourself, be aware of your feelings and recognize them, but don't get down on yourself for not being excited, like it's kind of like, oh, well, I'm here and some of my friends don't get to travel for their IQP. I should be so excited. I should be so happy about this. Not every day, like some days are going to be challenging. Some days you might feel like your Spanish is not up to speed and you might be frustrated with communication or so, just be aware of your feelings, be forgiving of yourself, and reach out to resources if you feel like you need them. Through ISOS, you have 5 free emotional support calls that they can help you set up. That you can do straight through the app. You don't have to engage with Geo at all. You don't even have to tell your advisors. So you can certainly access that as you wish. And just looking out for each other. So you may recognize a teammate or a roommate who is kind of withdrawing a little bit. It's normal to feel homesick. If you feel like something is starting to really impede on project work, that's when to engage with your advisors. Just some reminders of how to take care of one another. And then I just want to remind you to kind of wrap this up. These are the slides that you saw in the Canvas resource about sexual assault abroad. As a reminder, if something were ever to come up, what people need is support from one another in a situation like this, especially when away from a lot of our support resources on campus. So just some reminders of how to support one another in situations like that. And again, who is a confidential and a non-confidential resource. So myself, the whole Geo staff, your faculty are non-confidential resources per the Title IX regulations. All that means is that we are required to make sure that institutional support, meaning the Title IX office, is aware of an incident that has happened and is able to follow up with that person to make sure they have the right resources. Doesn't mean that we need to know every single detail, but it does mean that we're just required reporters. Confidential resources you can see here, which would include the SDCC and health services, and other non-WPI support that will be listed in your handbook. So I see one question from Bella and upvoted from Mara in the chat about your $5,000 scholarship. So on your spring semester bill, you're going to see your program fee for Cuenca, and then you'll see your $5,000 scholarship. The way that works afterwards is the program fee for Cuenca will be less than the scholarship amount. So once your whole bill is paid off, if that results in an overpayment, then you can request a refund through the bursar. Since you're going to be away, I would highly recommend making sure that you have direct deposit set up, especially if that's going right back to your bank account, because then you can request the refund and it'll go right back to you. But everybody, I mean, it's such a personal question because everybody's bill looks different. Some people are paying out of pocket, so you may just leave the refund to go towards tuition for next semester. It's really up to you, but it will be on your spring bill. Any other questions? Anything I left out, Gary or Courtney or Esther? Okay.
I don't think so.
No, thanks, Erin. I just want to reiterate that, everything counts. Yeah. So your grade is contingent on, everything that Erin has just mentioned. Okay. So students be attentive to, all the things that we had warned you and given you information about. So if you have any questions, let's talk about this during our PQP meetings with you. Thanks, Erin.
So, yeah, one other thing, have you gotten the passports from the students yet?
We just have a couple passports that we're waiting on. Do you need those for housing?
You're gonna get mail from Anna today,
Okay, okay.
so,
Yeah, we can give her who we have. I think the people we're waiting on renewals or had other delays for some reason. So they've been in touch with Candace, but overall, this cohort has been really great about that stuff.
Good.
So,
good, we scared them.
good job. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. I'm jealous that you get to go to Cuenca, and we have the rest of the term here. So if you have any concerns before you go, please reach out to our office. Thanks.